students to study the basic principles, the framework, all these things at first. Even while studying the constitutional law, I used to insist the students to go through the Constituent Assembly debates. Now the topic today is criminology and penology, the historical development. See, criminology, what is the definition of criminology? Criminology is the branch of science which deals with the crime. You know very well, crime and prevention of crime. See, right from the primitive society, the crimes were in existence. See, to understand the meaning of crime and to understand the criminal law, before that you must know what is criminology and what is the subject deals, the criminology deals with. That is, it deals with crime and the prevention of crime. And at the same time, victimology. Victimology is the subdiscipline of criminology. It is a scientific study of victimization. It includes, that is, the relationship between victim and the offender, victim and the criminal justice system, victim and the other social groups and institutions. So for all these things, today society cannot exist without criminal law. Society can exist without any other laws, legislations, but a society cannot exist without criminal law. For that purpose, we particularly selected this topic, criminology and victimology, the historical development. The purpose of selecting the topic was, you should study the basic thing, the historical aspect of a particular subject, especially criminology and victimology. I know very well that you are very much interested in criminal law, but before going to the criminal law, before going to criminology and victimology, you should understand the historical development. It is a must. If you understand the historical development of criminology and victimology, it will create an addiction. So, today is a golden opportunity for us that the eminent, distinguished Professor Dr. K.CHOCKALINGAM is with us. And if I point out the credentials of Dr. K.CHOCKALINGAM, you will understand his credibility, that is, the contributions, achievements he made in the field of criminology and victimology. It is not an exaggeration. It is a great thing. We are blessed enough to have such an eminent personality today with us. See, if I point out his contributions, his achievements, you can guess that the eminent personality is with us today, and we are lucky enough. And apart from welcoming him for this session, I am very grateful to him. Let me point out his profile. Professor Dr. K.CHOCKALINGAM said his qualification is MA, MLit, ML, PhD and Diploma in Germany. He is currently the chairperson of the Executive Council at Rajiv Gandhi National Institute of Youth Development. This is an institution of national importance by the Act of Parliament number 35 of 2012. Government of India. This institution is situated at Sriperumbudur, Chennai. He is the Executive Council right from October 2017. It is pertinent to point out that he was nominated by His Excellency the President of India. Moreover, the important point, the position he hold, that is, he was the former Vice Chancellor of Manoன்மணியம் Sundaranaar University, Tirunelveli. That's from 2001 to 2004. He made wonders, and he brought the university from the bottom to the topmost level when he was the Vice Chancellor of MS University, Tirunelveli. From 2005 to 2011, he served as the full-time professor of Victimology and Criminology in Japan, that is, at Tokiwa International Victimology Institute, besides serving as its deputy director and then as the director of International Center at the Tokiwa University, Mito, Japan. After his return to India in the year 2012, Dr. Chokkalingam sir was appointed as the K.L. Arora Chair Professor in Criminal Law at the National Law University, Delhi from 2012 to 2014. He was a Max Planck Research Fellow for 3 months each in 1996 and 1998 at the Max Planck Institute for International and Foreign Penal Law, Germany. He has visited more than 30 countries and lectured at different universities, including Oxford and Harvard. He has guided more than 50 students for their PhD, their MPhil, MA, and LLM dissertations. It is very, very important to point out at this time is he was named as the father of victimology in India. Father of victimology in India. Chokkalingam sir was the founding head of the Department of Criminology at the University of Madras from April 1983 for more than 2 decades. From April 1983 till 2001, he was the head of the Department of Criminology at the Madras University. He was the founder secretary of Indian Society of Criminology in 1970. Being the pioneer in the field of victimology, and is known as the father of victimology in India, he founded the Indian Society of Victimology in 1992 and was its president for 15 years until 2007. He was a life member of the World Society of Victimology and served its 15-member executive committee for 27 years. He is the only Indian scholar elected to this body and contributed significantly for international victimology. Dr. Chokkalingam sir's contributions, that is awards, received were many. National and international recognitions for his multiple contributions are to be pointed out here. The Indian Society of Criminology conferred Sushil Chandra Senior Social Scientist Award by the then Union Home Minister Shri S.B. Chavan in the year 1994. This is for his contribution to criminology. He received ISC Kumarappa Reckless Award in the year 1998 from the Union Home Minister Shri L.K. Advani for his significant contributions to Criminology and Victimology. Professor Dr. K.CHOCKALINGAM sir received the Tamil Nadu Scientist Award in the year 1996. That is from the State Council for Science and Technology. He received the prestigious UGC National Hario Ashram Trust Award from the then Union HRD Minister Sri Murali Manohar Joshi in recognition of his pioneering work in the field of victimology in 2003. Earlier in 1996, he received the Distinguished International Scholar Award from the American Society of Criminology at Chicago in their annual conference for his significant contribution to criminology. The Indian Institute of Public Administration conferred its Paul Appleby Award in 2015 for his distinguished services to public administration. Apart from that, Professor Dr. Chokkalingam sir has authored more than 75 scientific articles. Besides, 5 books and project reports were also completed by sir, that is Dr. Chokkalingam sir. Here, let me point out some special distinctions. As a tribute to his pioneering contribution to victimology, the Indian Society of Victimology, ISV, founded in the year 1992, has instituted its highest award in 2013 in the name of Professor K.CHOCKALINGAM sir, that is called Professor K.CHOCKALINGAM Award, to be given to a scholar who has made a significant contribution to victimology, and present the award during its biennial conferences. And so far, 4 professors from different universities in India received the said award. On the Teachers' Day on September 5, 2019, the Department of Criminology, Manonmaniyam Sundaranaar University, felicitated Professor Dr. K.CHOCKALINGAM for his completion of 50 years as a distinguished teacher and a researcher in the field of criminology and victimology. That is in India and abroad, and released a first script volume titled as Criminology and Victimology Through the Looking Glass. In August 2020, Professor Sanjeev Shahini of the Center for Victimology and Psychological Studies of O.P. Jindal Global University and Professor Belua Shekhar, Head of the Department of Criminology and Criminal Justice Sciences, MS University, published another first script volume in honor of Professor Dr. K.CHOCKALINGAM sir in the title A Global Perspective of Victimology and Criminology, with contributions from outstanding scholars from different countries. And the book is going to be formally released in the 14th UN Congress on Crime Prevention and Criminal Justice at Kyoto, Japan in March 2021. Dear participants, I think you are realizing that such an eminent personality is with us today. Such a humble nature. And he contributed many things, many articles and many books, and his services, such unimaginable that we cannot, there is no word to say about his contributions to the society. Since criminology is the basic thing for criminal law, it's a science. It's a must to understand the criminology, victimology, penology before going to study the Indian Penal Code criminal law. Criminal law is based upon the output of criminology penology and victimology. Now, once again, I am very thankful that he accepted immediately when I made a request to deliver a speech in this topic, criminology and victimology. Apart from his busy schedule and apart from his age and the other factors, he readily accepted. And I sincerely welcome and really I want to express, without an exaggeration, we are blessed to have you for this session, sir, before our students and other participants. We are lucky enough to have such an eminent personality. We are grateful forever, sir. And I welcome you, sir. Once again, I welcome all the principals of other colleges, all the professors of other colleges, the students, the participants. And once again, I welcome and thanks for giving the opportunity for delivering this welcome speech. Thank you, Onega. Welcome, sir.
Thank you, sir. I'm profusely overjoyed to take this opportunity to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Chokkalingam, sir, Chairperson and Executive Council, RGNIYD. He is a professor of criminology, criminal law, and victimology. He is also a former Vice Chancellor of MS University, Tirunelveli, and a former Vice President of World Society of Victimology. Over to you, sir.
Is it my turn now?
Yes, sir.
Are you hearing me? Are you hearing me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Am I audible?
It's audible, sir.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. Very good. Dr. R. Kumuda, the convener or the coordinator of other faculty members, distinguished principals of various colleges, government law colleges, and also the professors and students, other faculty members attending this program from Ambedkar Law University, Tamil Nadu Ambedkar Law University, and other students, friends. At the outset, of his college during this year, I appreciate all the efforts taken by Dr. Kubuda, assistant professor, to organize this program. For the benefit of the students of fourth year law or maybe fifth year law, I am pleased to talk to you on the subject of criminology and victimology, historical developments. Before I proceed, I would like to acknowledge and thank Dr. Gopalakrishnan for his very criminal law, punishment, criminology, victimology, and the interrelations among the concepts, these concepts. I am aware that it is too ambitious to talk about all these vast subjects within an hour. But I thought an outline of all these areas would be beneficial to the students of law to have a holistic view of criminological sciences, to create an interest on the fascinating subjects of criminology and victimology. In the year 1943, about 77 years from today, the renowned historian, sociologist, and criminologist Frank Tannenbaum, in his foreword to the first edition of the famous textbook called New Horizons in Criminology, which was a textbook which was a very popular textbook when I was a student about of banners and teeters. In the foreword given by Professor Tannenbaum, who was a very well-known sociologist, he wrote like this, I quote, "Crime is eternal as society. So far as we know, human fallibility has manifested itself in all types and forms of human organization. Everywhere, some human beings have fallen outside the pattern of permitted human conduct. It is best to face the fact that crime cannot be abolished except in a non-existent utopia. Weakness, anger, greed, jealousy, some form of human aberration has come to the surface everywhere, and human sanctions have vainly beaten against the irrational, the misguided, impulsive, and ill-conditioned. For reasons too subtle and too complex to understand, the ordinary pressures and expectancies that pattern the individual's conduct into conformity break down in given instances. They have always done so. They always will. No way of drawing the science of the good life, no way of drawing the scheme of the good life has yet been discovered, which will fulfill the needs of all human beings at all times." Friends, this the book published about 50 years ago, more than 50 years ago, the Tannenbaum, Frank Tannenbaum's, his words I have translated, I have put it in my own book, which was book on criminology, published about 20 years before in India. This is the book, and in the year 1997, when it was published, I have in the cover page I have written. Suddenly I remembered the பேரானது. நாம் அறிந்த வரையில் மனித தவறுகள் மனித சமுதாய அமைப்புகளின் அனைத்து வடிவங்களிலும் ஏதேனும் ஒரு வழியில் வெளிப்பட்டு கொண்டிருக்கின்றன. எல்லா இடங்களிலும் சில மனிதர்கள் சமுதாயத்தினால் அனுமதிக்கப்பட்ட மனித நடத்தை, ஹியூமன் காண்டக்ட் என்னும் வரம்பிற்கு வெளியில் இருந்து கொண்டேதான் உள்ளனர். உண்மையற்ற கன உலகத்தை தவிர, உட்டோபியா, தட் இஸ் உட்டோபியா, உண்மையற்ற கன உலகத்தை தவிர வேறெங்குமே குற்றங்களை ஒழிக்க இயலாது என்ற உண்மையை ஒப்புக்கொள்வதே சிறந்தது. வலிமையின்மை, கோபம், பொறாமை முதலான மனித பண்புகளில் ஏற்படுகின்ற சில கீறல்கள் எல்லா இடங்களிலும் அன்றாடம் வெளிப்பட்டு கொண்டுதான் இருக்கின்றன. இவற்றை தடுப்பதற்கு மனிதனால் ஏற்படுத்தப்பட்ட நிலையான ஒன்று. எந்த அளவுக்கு சமுதாயம் சிக்கலாகி கொண்டு போகின்றதோ அந்த அளவுக்கு மனிதன் சமுதாயத்துடன் ஒன்றி போவது கடினமாகி அதே அளவுக்கு மனிதன் தன் முயற்சிகளில் தோல்விகளை சந்திக்கின்றான். இவ்வாசகங்கள் 1943ஆம் ஆண்டு குற்றத்தை பற்றி பேராசிரியர் பிராங்க் டானன்பாம் எழுதியவை. இவை அன்றும் இன்றும் என்றும் பொருந்தும். So, such a great historian and sociologist and criminologist has talked about crime, which is even applicable today, when there is a lot of human developments. There are a lot of developments of technology. Increased, and it has taken different dimensions, and the crime has always been at all times, whether it was in the previous century or current century or even in the next century. Now, originally, centuries before, crimes were not defined officially and involved no official action, but were considered as private matters. Individuals who suffered by the wrongdoings of others would seek retribution. Retribution is revenge against the wrongdoer or his family. This concept of personal justice is found in all early laws, including the very famous Code of Hammurabi from 1900 BC, before Christ. The system broke down only when the family structure changed and private vengeance became difficult, if not impossible, to enforce. But when the system existed, the victim or the harmed person in his family would get revenge, if not from the wrongdoer, then from one or more members of that person's family, wrongdoer's family. Later, the concept of crime evolved, but was confined to acts committed against the king. For example, treason. And private revenge remained the only punishment for acts against private citizens. Eventually, the king, representing the state, realized that the peace of the community was at stake and decreed that when a person is wronged, that act should be reported to the king, who would take action for punishment. Thus, anyone who injured the king's subjects was considered to have injured the king himself. And the phrase all law students must have heard, keeping the peace of the king, developed. The phrase called keeping the peace of the king. That means if you commit a crime, then you are disturbing the king's peace. That is why crime is considered as an act against the state now. All of you know, all students of criminal law, for that matter, all students of law would know that crime has been considered as an act against the state, though the real sufferer is an individual with flesh and blood called victim. Now, legal definition of crime. In criminological and legal researches involving empirical investigations comparing criminals and non-criminals, operational definitions of the concepts used are required. The definitions of the concepts should be precise, unambiguous, and capable of measurement. Legal and non-legal definitions of crime and criminal have been used by criminologists. Criminologists always do empirical researches. That means investigation, scientific investigations of the concept of crime, the criminals, and the causes for the crime by measuring the criminality, measuring the incidents. So for measurement, always we are concerned is based on the legal approach. Crime is an act defined by law. Unless the elements specified by statutory or case law are present and proved beyond a reasonable doubt, a person cannot be convicted of a crime. The legal definition of the lawyer sociologist Paul Tappen will serve as our reference point for the definition of crime. According to Paul Tappen, a very famous sociologist, crime is an intentional act or omission in violation of criminal law, statutory and case law, committed without defense or justification, and sanctioned by the state as a felony or misdemeanor. Felony and misdemeanor are the terms used in American criminal law, meaning, in simple terms, for simple understanding, serious crimes are felonies and non-serious crimes are misdemeanors, respectively. Now, coming to non-legal definitions of crime, criminologists the criminologist called Thorsten Selin, Professor Thorsten Selin. Selin emphasized that non-scientists should not be permitted to define the subject matter for scientists. Tell social scientists how crime must be defined. He does not claim that there is no place for legal definition in criminology. What he does claim is that if a science of human conduct is to develop, the investigator in this field of research must rid himself of shackles which have been forged by the criminal law. Selin then goes on to discuss the development of what he calls conduct norms, way of doing things that are developed by a group through social interaction. For every person, there is, from the point of view of a given group of which he is a member, a normal and an abnormal way of reacting. The norm depending on the social values of the group, which formulate meaning of criminology. The origin of the term criminology can be traced to the French anthropologist whose major publication appeared in the year 1879. In the 18th and early 19th centuries, the emphasis was on the reform of criminal law, as the punishment of crimes was very brutal, even for petty crimes like theft. As students of criminal law, when you want to study the history of criminology, you should understand that criminology did not emerge or evolve or start as a scientific study of the causation of crime. In fact, the early originators, the early thinkers, the pioneers of criminology started the criminological science only for the reforms of criminal law, because in 17th century and earlier, the punishments for the crimes were very, very brutal, even for petty crimes like theft. Hello? Am I online? Are you hearing me?
Yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
Okay, because suddenly there was a message that you lost connection. That's why I recheck every time.
No problem.
Okay. Okay. So the two, I said that these were the people who initiated the field of criminology were not really scientific criminologists, but they were great contributors. They are the two major reformers called Caesar Beccaria and Jeremy Bentham, who wrote for humanitarian, not for scientific reasons. They wanted to reform the severe criminal law, but they did not write about the scientific reasons for the cause of crime. Sociologists generally emphasize the etiology of criminal behavior. Etiology means causation. They emphasize that it is important for criminology to study why do people commit crime, why some people alone commit. So the causation in criminal law, not in the science of criminal behavior. In June 1909, at the National Conference of Criminal Law and Criminology in Chicago, a resolution was passed that provided that the president of the university appoint a committee of 5 persons to select criminological treatises that should be translated into English, because the seeds of criminology grew first in European countries, Europe, and not in America. For the community at large, it is important to recognize that criminal science is a larger thing than criminal law. Criminal science is a much larger thing than criminal law. The legal profession, in particular, has a duty to familiarize itself with the principles of that science as the sole means for the intelligent and systematic improvement of the criminal law. Despite this step, the profession of law has remained aloof from the developments in the field of criminology. Since the 1960s, there have been attempts in the United States of America on the part of lawyers, sociologists, and other professionals interested in criminology to look at the problem of crime from more than one disciplinary perspective. But we still cannot dispute the statement of Thorsten Selin made in 1938 that a criminologist needs training in sociology, psychology, systems engineering, political science, social work, public administration, business, and economics. Great progress has been made since 1920, when the American textbook in criminology was written by the sociologist Maurice Pomeroy under the title Criminology. Today, the discipline of criminology is characterized by a great interdisciplinary approach, more sophisticated research methods, and greater emphasis on empirical research. But criminology was not recognized as a separate discipline for a long time, and in most small colleges and many universities, it was taught under the umbrella of sociology or criminal justice in United States of America. It took several decades for criminology to attain the status of an independent discipline under social sciences. Nowadays, in the last 15-20 years, there have been many independent departments of criminology started even in India, in the Indian universities. So what then is criminology? Traditionally, it has been approached as a body of knowledge aimed at the scientific explanation of criminal and delinquent behavior as social phenomena. But criminology involves more than the etiology or causation of criminal behavior. It also includes the sociology of law, by which we attempt to understand how and why criminal laws develop and change. The sociology of law is also concerned with the ways in which the criminal law is applied. Finally, criminology involves penology or corrections, which entails an analysis of the ways in which society reacts to criminal behavior. Actually, inclusion of victimology as a part of criminology happened only in the last 50 to 60 years. Because originally, the science of criminology included the etiology of crime and the science of punishment, that is penology, and then penology, which includes corrections or correctional administration. Now, historical development of criminology. The history of primitive societies early medieval period reveals that human thinking in those days was predominated by religious mysticism, and all human relations were regulated through myths, superstitious and religious tenets prevailing in a particular society. This, in other words, meant that little attention was devoted to the motive, environment, and psychology of the offender in the causation of crime. Moreover, in the absence of any definite principle of the guidance for the guidance of those who were concerned with criminal justice administration, punishments were often disorganized, arbitrary, and irrational. This situation prevailed until the end of 17th century. Thereafter, with the change in human thinking and evolution of modern society, certain social reformers took up the cause of criminals and devoted their attention to analysis of crime causation. This finally led to the emergence of criminology as a branch of knowledge through development of different schools of criminology. The theoretical dimensions of criminology has a long history, and ideas about the causes of crime can be found in philosophical thought over 2000 years ago. For example, in politics, Plato's student Aristotle stated that poverty engenders rebellion and crime. Poverty, that is rebellion and crime. Religious scholars focused on causes as diverse as natural human need, deadly sins, and the corrupting influence of Satan and other demons, that is evil spirits. The validity of such theories was founded in religious authority, and they were not viewed as theories subject to verification through any form of systematic observation, measurement, and analysis. Rational, naturalistic philosophers about people and society grew in prominence during the 18th century. Enlightenment philosophers as Montesquieu, Voltaire, Caesar Beccaria, and Jeremy Bentham criticized political and legal institutions and advocated social reforms based on the assumption that people criminal law, criminality, and a contribution of the classical school is that it believed and it propounded that the man chooses to commit crime get pleasure. So crime, if he commits crime, he fine, whether it is a sexual crime or monetary crime, corruption or anything, you would find the because between the good and the bad, he chooses to commit the bad. Some people chooses to commit the bad things or the violations of criminal law because they find pleasure in it, because they get benefit out of it. If it is a monetary crime, they get money and they are indulging in crimes of gain, crime producing gain. Such perspective is where emphasizing demonic causes or evil spirits. Classical theorists assumed that most people were capable of calculation of gains and costs, that criminality was a choice. Laws were to be designed and enforced based on the principle. Contemporary deterrence theory, choice theory, and social learning theory in criminology incorporate the same assumptions. The origins of a more systematic criminology, however, are located in the late 18th century writings of those who sought to reform criminal justice and penal systems that they perceived as cruel, inhuman. The lead Beccaria that the law must apply equally to all, and the punishments for specific crimes should be standardized by legislatures, thus avoiding judicial abuses of power. Both Beccaria and another classical theorist, the Englishman Jeremy Bentham, 1748 to 1832, argued that people are rational beings. Human beings are rational. They are able to think what is good and what is bad. who exercise free will in making choices of their conduct. Beccaria and Bentham understood the dominant motive in making choices to be the seeking of pleasure and avoidance of pain. Thus, they argued that punishment should fit the crime. So this is a great leaping development at the time of Beccaria and Bentham. They said the punishment should fit the crime. The arbitrariness in punishment would be avoided only when the punishment is given on the basis of the crime. That means the discretion for the judges to provide discretion for the judges to award the kind of punishment should be avoided. And there must be a codified criminal law. The Caesar Beccaria's contribution, in fact, among the criminological circles, they said, had the contribution, the greatest contribution of Caesar Beccaria deserved to be probably for for a Nobel Prize, because at that time, when the whole world was treating the offenders either as the demonic, due to a demonic influence or spiritual influences, or that they have chosen the crime because they get pleasure out of doing that, therefore they deserved to be punished brutally. That is why you would be wondering that hundreds of crimes in the British law at that time, British practices, was awarded with death penalty, including the petty theft and cutting of trees in the park. The writings of these theorists to greater codification and standardization of European and US laws. Criminologists of the early 19th centuries argued that legal punishments that had been created under the guidance of the classical school did not sufficiently consider the widely varying circumstances of those who found themselves in the gears of criminal justice system. One of the errors pointed out by the successors of Caesar Beccaria and Jeremy Bentham was that it is not fully correct, it is not completely correct to say that all human beings deliberately choose to commit crime, knowing very well that it is something harmful to the society, because there are individuals like children who commit the law violations or the human illegal conduct, the conduct which has been prohibited by the law, but they don't choose it, they don't understand the pros and cons of it. Therefore, the classical school, the explanation of the classical school for the crime, for the criminal conduct, is not completely correct according to the neoclassical school. They were called as neoclassical school. For example, people with insanity. Now, people who are insane, now they don't deliberately choose to commit crime because they don't know what is the consequence of they are doing. Accordingly, they proposed that those who could not distinguish right from wrong, particularly children and mentally ill persons, should be exempted from the punishments that were normally meted out to mentally capable adults and had committed the same crimes. Along with the contributions of a later generation of criminologists known as positivists, positive school of criminology, such writers argued that the punishment should fit the criminal, not the crime. So this is a very interesting development, because Beccaria said that punishment should fit the crime, the nature of the crime, the gravity of the crime, that should decide the quantum of punishment. But the criminological science, when it developed, they said it is not the crime which should be the criterion to decide the quantum of punishment, but it should be the criminal. For example, children should not be treated as adults. Insane people should not be considered equal to the sane people. Therefore, the punishment cannot be similar on the basis of the crime. It is not correct to provide equal punishment to all the people simply on the premise that the consequence of the conduct or the severity of the crime is same. Later in the 19th century, the positive school of criminology brought a scientific approach to criminology, including findings from biology and medicine. The leading figure of the school was the Italian medical doctor. He was a prison doctor called Cesar Lombroso, 1836 to 1909. Influenced by Charles or Darwin's theory of evolution, Lombroso measured the physical features, morphology of prison inmates and concluded that criminal behavior correlated with specific bodily characteristics, particularly cranial, skeletal, and neurological malformations. According to Lombroso, biology created a criminal class among the human population. Subsequent generations of criminologists disagreed harshly with Lombroso's conclusions on this matter. However, Lombroso had a more lasting effect on criminology with other findings that emphasized that multiple causes of crime, including environmental causes that were not biologically determined. He was also a pioneer statisticians of the yet statisticians of the cartographic school who analyzed data on population and crime. These included Lambert Adolphe Quetelet of France and Henri Michael Guéry of Belgium. Both of these researchers compiled detailed statistical information relating to crime and also attempted to identify the circumstances that predisposed people to commit crime. The writings of French sociologist Émile Durkheim, 1858 to 1900, can ever have complete uniformity of moral consciousness. Permit some deviancy, including criminal deviancy, or they will stagnate. She saw the criminal as an acceptable human being and one of the prizes that a society pays for freedom. Durkheim also theorized about the ways in which modern industrial societies differ from non-industrial ones. Industrial societies are not as effective as producing what Durkheim called a collective conscience that effectively controls the behavior of individuals. Individuals in industrial societies are more likely to exhibit what Durkheim called anomie, a Greek word meaning normlessness or without norms. Consequently, modern societies have had to develop specialized laws and criminal justice systems that were not necessary in early societies to control behavior. According to Durkheim and other functionalists, crime can have the following functions for society. Crime also has certain positive things according to Durkheim. He says crime strengthens the group cohesion and it can lead to social change. In the year 1941, a group of individuals in California organized an event for the purpose of improving police training and the standardization of police training curricula. In 1946, this movement developed into the establishment of the Society for the Advancement of Criminology, which changed its name to the American Society of Criminology in the year 1957. Initial efforts of this organization focused upon scientific crime detection, investigation, and identification, crime prevention, public safety and security, law enforcement administration of criminal justice, traffic administration, and probation. All these were subject matters of criminology. Theories of crime causation and multiple causation approach. I was mentioning so far that several kinds of theories developed, and each theory focused on a particular aspect of the human, particular aspect or explanation to explain criminal behavior. But later on, the continuous researches, continuous empirical investigations of criminologists over the last 200 years evolved the new knowledge which said that no single theory is able to explain crime completely. Now, in the last 100 years, several explanations and theories of crime causation were propounded by different disciplines such as biological school, geographical school of crime causation, psychological explanation of crime, economic factors, sociological theories, etc. Out of all the above theories and explanations, modern criminologists believe that sociological theories of crime has a higher credibility, as the crux of sociological explanation is that crime is a learned behavior determined largely by the explanation given by Beccaria is called as, is known as the scientific criminology, because he only started studying crime from a scientific point of view, using scientific methods. Now, but though his methods were unique and pioneering at that time, his explanation, his theory was completely unacceptable in the later years, because he said criminal is born. Criminal is born. His theory is biological school of criminology. So he said that criminals have inherited certain characteristics, and that is why criminal is born. That theory has been completely repudiated, completely disallowed, because of the emergence of many sociological theories. They said crime is largely caused by the environmental factors or the sociological factors. Distinguished French criminologist Professor Enrico Ferri said, I quote, to these factors, that means to all these sociological factors, we could add many others without ever exhausting them, since they include all that the universe contains, not omitting a word or a gesture. What we must add, however, is the fact that as a whole, they determine the law of criminal saturation. Enrico Ferri said a new law to explain crime. He said that it is called law of criminal saturation. What is law of criminal saturation? He said, I quote, just as in a given volume of water, at a given temperature, we find the solution of a fixed quantity of any chemical substance, not an atom more or less. So, in a given society, social environment, in certain defined physical conditions of the individual, we find the commission of a fixed number of crimes. So, just like in a particular quantity of water, after a chemical has been added, it will not accept even an atom inside, because it has attained the saturated level. Just like that, in a sociological environment, when every individual commits in a society, in a particular society, the number of crimes committed is fixed according to all the sociological and environmental determinants, neither more nor less. In other words, it means that the crimes are largely determined by the various negative social factors like poverty, unemployment, the lawlessness in the society, the peer group, the broken home, and so many other negative conditions which are deciding the number of crimes happening in a particular society. Now, Dr. Cyril Burt, an outstanding British psychologist, made a penetrating statement about the cause of delinquency and criminal behavior. As, I quote, crime is assignable to no single universal source, nor yet to two or three. It springs from a wide variety and usually from a multiplicity of alternative and converging influences. So the multiple approach to crime causation has been not only said by the sociologists but also by the psychologists like Dr. Cyril Butt. After examining much of the research and conclusions of the behavioral scientists, including the geographic and economic determinants over the past 200 through careful research, throws considerable light on the can be regarded only as segmental. So each of their explanation could be called as segmental only, not holistic. Professor George B. Wold, in his book called Theoretical Criminology, concludes crime must be recognized clearly as not being a unitary phenomenon, but as consisting of many kinds of behavior occurring under many different situations. No single theory, therefore, should be expected to provide the explanations of many varieties of behavior involved. Professor Ruth Cavan puts it, unfortunately, certain psychiatrists and sociologists have criticized each other's studies, a situation that has prevented a necessary joint approach to the study of crime. Actually, both the psychiatric, psychoanalytic, and the psychological approaches agree on certain important points. Both agree that no child is born criminal, but that he adopts criminal behavior as a result of experiences that begin in early life. So experiences in early life determine what he is going to turn in his later life. Thus, both agree that there is no easy way to understand crime. Both also agree that there is no quick and sure cure for crime. Now let us come to the second part of my lecture, victimology. Let us look into the newly emerged branch of criminology called victimology, the discovery of crime victims. In my earlier part of the lecture, I have already touched upon how victims were treated in the earlier society. During the period of Hammurabi, how the victims got the compensation right from the offender's family, offender or the offender's family. But that situation got changed when crime was accepted as an act against the state, because the state did not give any attention to the real sufferer who is called victim. Now, the word victim was connected to the notion of sacrifice in ancient cultures. So, victim in the ancient culture meant it had a meaning called sacrifice. In the original meaning of the term, the victim was a person or an animal put to death during a ceremony in order to appease some supernatural power or deity. Over the centuries, the word has picked up additional meanings. Now the term commonly refers to individuals who experience injury, loss, or hardship for any reason. People can be victims of accidents, victims of diseases, victims of natural disasters, or social problems like warfare, discrimination, or other injustices. Crime victims are harmed by illegal acts. Victimization is an asymmetrical relationship that is abusive, destructive, parasitical, unfair, and in many cases in violation of law. While the crime is in progress, criminals temporarily force their victims to play roles that mimic the dynamics between predator and prey, winner and loser. Direct or primary victims experience the criminal act and its consequences firsthand. Whereas indirect or secondary victims, now secondary victims, family is a secondary victim. If somebody is dead, then the family becomes a secondary victim. If somebody is gravely injured, suffering grievous injury, then his family members would be the secondary victims. Secondary victims such as family members also suffer emotionally or financially but are not immediately involved or injured. Survivors are the relatives of people killed by murderers. The definition, the decline of crime victims. I was telling that the crime victims had a golden period about 2000 years before, because they got recognition and nobody interfered. They got the compensation for the crime directly, but later on, the crime victim was completely sidelined and completely forgotten in the criminal justice system when the modern criminal justice system evolved. How? The decline of crime victims. Scholars who study the history of legal system report that in the last centuries, victim played a leading role in the resolution of criminal matters. To discourage retaliation by victims and their families, acts that could lead to endless feuding if offenders and their kin counterattacked, societies in simpler times established direct repayment schemes. Legal codes around the world enabled legal code CODES codes around the world enabled victims to receive monetary compensation or valuables from wrongdoers to compensate for the pain, suffering, and losses they endured. This process of victim-oriented justice prevailed mostly in small villages engaged in farming, where social relations were based on personal obligations, clear-cut family ties, strong religious beliefs, and traditions considered to be sacred. But the victim but the victim's role diminished as industrialization and urbanization brought about business relations that were voluntary, secular, impersonal, rationalized, and contractual. Victims lost control over the process of determining the fate of the offenders who harmed them. Instead, the local government structure dominated judicial proceedings and extracted fines from convicts, physically punished them, or even executed them. The seriousness of the wounds and losses inflicted upon victims were of importance only for determining the charges and penalties upon conviction. Restoring victims to the condition they were in before the crimes occurred was no longer the main concern of the modern criminal justice system. In colonial America, when police forces and public prosecutors were not established, victims were the key decision makers within the rudimentary criminal justice system and its direct beneficiaries. Victims conducted their own investigations, paid for warrants to have sheriffs make arrests, and hired private attorneys to indict and prosecute their alleged attackers. Convicts were forced to repay their victims up to 3 times as much as they damaged or stole. But after American Revolution and the adoption of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, crimes were reconceptualized as hostile acts directed against the authority of the state, which was defined as representative of the people. Addressing the victim's suffering was deemed to be less important than dealing with symbolic threat to the social order posed by lawbreakers. Public prosecutors acting on behalf of the government and in the name of the entire society took over the powers and responsibilities formerly exercised by victims. The goals of deterring crime through punishment, protecting society by incapacitating dangerous offenders in prisons or through executions, and rehabilitating less serious offenders through treatment came to overshadow victims' demands to be restored to financial, emotional, and physical health. Over the last 2 centuries, as victims lost control over their cases, their role dwindled to just two contributors: the victim and the prosecutor. Victims rarely included and consulted when the police and prosecution team decided upon its strategies and goals. To add insult to injury, they were not even informed of the outcome of their cases. The rediscovery of the victim. After decades, even centuries, crime victims were given renewed attention and in effect were rediscovered during the late 1950s and early 1960s. A small number of self-help advocates, social scientists, crusading journalists, enlightened criminal justice officials, and responsive lawmakers helped to direct public concern toward what they defined as a serious problem: the total disregard of victim issues. Through writings, meetings, and events such as rallies and petition drives, these activists got across their message that victims were forgotten people whose needs and wants had been systematically overlooked but deserved attention and action. Discussions and debate emerged in the late 1960s and intensified throughout 1970s and 1980s and 1990s. As a result, new laws favorable to victims were passed in United States, and criminal justice policies got changed not only in United States but also in many developed countries. Victimology is now recognized as a scientific study of the physical, emotional, and financial harm people suffer because of criminal activities. Victimologists not only investigate the impact of the injuries and losses inflicted by offenders, but also the handling of victims by the criminal justice system. The interaction with the agencies and officials, especially police officials, prosecutors, defense lawyers, judges, probation officers, and the public's reaction to the plight of victims. Victimologists want to know if victims have been physically injured, economically hurt, robbed of self-respect, emotionally traumatized, socially stigmatized, politically oppressed, collectively exploited, personally alienated, manipulated, co-opted, neglected, ignored, psychological, subjected to by the to the victims. The first recognition of victims in the world, the first recognition in the modern criminal justice system started during the 7th United Nations Congress on the Prevention of Crime and Treatment of Offenders, 1985. Now, in this Congress, in the history of the United Nations Congresses on Prevention of Crime and Treatment of Offenders, victims was included as an agenda. It was taken up for discussion as an agenda for the first time. The UN Congresses or the United Nations Congresses on Prevention of Crime and Treatment of Offenders are meetings of the high-level representatives of member countries of the UN who meet once in 5 years, wherein the policy exchanges and best practices on prevention of crime and treatment of offenders are shared, discussed, and debated. One such United Congress, UN Congress on prevention of crime and treatment of offenders was held last week in Kyoto, Japan. That is 14th United Nations Congress. Many international instruments, right from the most revered documents such as the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and many other instruments protecting the rights of women, children, prisoners, etc., have been framed and adopted by these UN congresses in the past. General Assembly. High-level governmental delegations from member countries and selected individual experts were invited for the United Nations Congresses. And in the 7th United Nations Congress on Prevention of Crime and Treatment of Offenders, held in Milan, Italy, in September 1985, from September 1 to 1985, they also invited the governmental delegations and individual experts. The Indian delegation, deputed by the Ministry of Home Affairs, Government of India, to the 7th UN Congress in 1985, was led by Mr. S.M. Dias, the retired Inspector General of Police Prevention of Crime and Treatment of Offenders at Milan, Italy, where Cesar Lombroso was born. As an individual expert, and as head of the Department of Criminology of the University of for the first time in the world, the the declaration, the United Nations Declaration on the Basic Principles of Justice for Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power was unanimously approved, which later went to the United Nations General Assembly for adoption. It was not a smooth sailing for the adoption of the Declaration of Victims, as powerful countries like United States and Russia had several reservations, particularly in accepting the part relating to victims of abuse of power. Because if victims of abuse of power were included in the declaration, then abuse of power will affect the nations. Because who are the the offenders of abuse of power? Offenders are the state or the state agencies, the police, the other law enforcement agencies. Naturally, the governments were not interested in having the victims of abuse of power included in the declaration. So they were against including the victims of abuse of power in the declaration. I remember very well that at this crucial time, the chairman of the Indian delegation, Dr. Dias, played a significant mediation role, bringing the dissenters over the discussions table during lunchtime and evening hours, and made them carefully review the sections relating to victims of abuse of power. After several rounds of discussions and modifications of certain clauses, Mr. Dias could persuade the US and Russian delegation to have the Declaration of Victims passed unanimously. Later, the General Assembly of the United Nations in its 96th plenary meeting adopted the Declaration of Basic Principles of Justice for Victims of Crime and Abuse of Power on 29th November 1985 as UN Resolution 40/34. Now, this is the world development relating to victims. For the first time, Professor T. Shanmugam and Mr. N. Pichandi and I had deliberations in the early months of 1970, and it was decided to convert a student body. We had a student body
Excuse me, sir. Sir, you're in mute, sir. We are unable to hear you. Please unmute. Sir, you're not audible, sir. Please unmute, sir.
Hello?
Yes, sir. You're now audible, sir.
But how many minutes you were not, I was not audible? Is it for a long time?
Just 1 minute.
Well, okay. No, because I was talking about the developments happening in India for the victimological movement. So I formed in the year 1970 by converting Forensic Science Study Circle, which was a student body, student organization that was made into a national body called the Indian Society of Criminology, which is now celebrating, which has just crossed 50 years old now. So it was the Indian Society of Criminology was formally inaugurated by the then Chief Minister of Tamil Nadu, Mr. M. Karunanidhi, on 18th November 1970, in which a large gathering of audience, which included of Tamil Nadu cabinet and many civil servants, police officers, university professors, and students in the Senate.
Excuse me, sir. We can't hear you, sir. You're again unmuted.
That the a national level body called the Indian NGO called established in the year 1970, and it was formally inaugurated by the then Chief Minister Mr. M. Karunanidhi on 18th November 1970, in which the Police of Tamil Nadu, Mr. R. M. Mahadevan, they addressed the gathering. It was a very historic event. Now, later on, the Department of Criminology, when it was started, it contributed for the development of victimology in a big for about a decade, got filled within the next decade's time as it blossomed into a separate independent department of criminology at the University of Madras in April 1983. And I assumed office as the founding head of the Department of Criminology with two colleagues. During those days, when criminology itself was in its beginnings in India, hardly any attention was paid to the victims of crime. But the newly established Department of Criminology organized a 3-day regional seminar on victimology, exclusively focusing on access to justice for victims, the problems faced by crime victims, and about the need for victim restitution, compensation, and assistance. The important papers presented in this seminar on victimology resulted in the publication called Readings in Victimology, with a foreword from Justice V.R. Krishnaiyer, edited World Forum in the name of World Society of Victimology was established in Germany to promote the cause of victims and to develop victimological research. In 1991, the World Society of Victimology, at its executive committee meeting held at Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, unanimously resolved to co-opt me as a member of the executive committee of the World Society of Victimology, in accordance with their policy to co-opt 3 members got an opportunity for representation in the 15-member executive member of the World Society of Victimology. After my return from Rio de Janeiro in August 1991, I took series of efforts to have discussions with my academic colleagues and some senior police officers like the former Director of Central Bureau of Investigation, Dr. R.K. Raghavan, and Mr. L.N. Venkatesan. And in the early 1992, in a meeting attended by many academics, lawyers, police officers, correctional officers, and research scholars, it was resolved unanimously to establish an organization for victimology in the name of Indian Society of Victimology to promote the cause of victims in India. After a few months, in a grand gathering, the Indian Society of Victimology was formally inaugurated by the octogenarian jurist and former judge of the Supreme Court of India, Justice V.R. Krishnaiyer, at the University of Madras, Chennai, on 14th August 1992. Since late 1980s and throughout 1990s, the Department of Criminology of the University of Madras encouraged many research scholars and master students to undertake research on victimological issues, either for their doctoral research or master's degree dissertations. Simultaneously, other scholars who studied victims from other institutions and universities also made significant contributions to promote victimological research in India. Now, major contributions of Indian Society of Victimology for victimological movement in India. The Indian Society of Victimology, with the help and support of Professor N.R. Madhava Menon, the second biennial conference of the Indian Society of Victimology in 1994 took this victim assistance draft bill as a major theme of the conference for discussions among the participants. The draft bill on victim assistance with certain modifications was made. The Indian Society of Victimology, with the support of Justice V.S. Malimath, member of the National Human Rights Commission, convened a high-level workshop for one day, inviting about 20 selected senior experts from higher judiciary, police, prosecution, and academics, which was discussed by the jurist, which was chaired by the Justice P.R. Krishnaiyer at Chennai, and this workshop reviewed all the provisions of the draft bill, made suitable modifications, finalized the Victims' Criminal Injuries Right to Assistance Bill in the year 1996. The draft bill on victim assistance was forwarded to the Ministry of Home Affairs and Ministry of Law and Justice, Government of India, for their consideration to make it a national level legislation. Many jurists like Justice Krishna Iyer, former Chief Justice Mr. M.N. Venkatachalaya, member of the National Human Rights Commission, Justice V.S. Malimath, academic scholar like Professor Madhav Menon, all emphasized the need for a victim legislation to make victim compensation mandatory. Justice Venkatachalaya, in his report of the National Commission to review the working of the Constitution, even the report of the Committee on Criminal Are you able to hear me?
Yes,
Hello?
sir, you're audible, sir.
We have many improvements like the victim compensation provision 7A of the Code of Criminal Procedure. But 20 years before, the 22 years before, there was nothing. And at that time, the Indian Society of Victimology took a lot of efforts to create a victim assistance fund. With the help of Justice V.R. Krishnaiyer, we made a draft bill on victim compensation. I talked about this. And at the state level, meanwhile, due to the consistent efforts of the Indian Society of Victimology, the government of Tamil Nadu established a victim assistance fund since 1995, through which three specific categories of victims of violent crimes, namely murder, rape, and grievous hurt, were made eligible to get a compensation. The amount of compensation or the victim assistance was small, very small amount, 10,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees, etc. But this was a token, for the first time, a recognition for victims, suffering victims. three more kinds of victims to get eligibility for compensation or assistance. Now, Criminal Law Amendment Act of 2008 and victim compensation provisions in India. Under the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973, by introducing an amendment and inserting section 357A, victim compensation scheme has been elaborated. Every state government, in coordination with the central government shall prepare a scheme for providing a fund. Whenever a court recommends for compensation, the district legal service authority or the state legal service authority shall decide the amount of compensation to be awarded under the scheme. If the trial court is satisfied that the compensation award is inadequate, or where the cases end in acquittal or discharge, and the victim has to be treated, it may make a recommendation for compensation. Where the offender is not traced or identified, but the victim has been identified, and no trial takes place, the victim or his or her dependents may make an application to the state or district legal service authority for uh, uh, for an award of compensation. On receipt of such recommendations, the state or the district legal service authority shall award adequate compensation by completing an inquiry and make a decision within 2 months. The state or the district legal service authority may order for immediate first aid, medical benefits, or any other interim relief to be made available free of cost based on the certification of the police officer or a magistrate. Under section 372, a provision has been inserted giving the victim a right to make an appeal against any order passed by the in India when there was nothing for victims. The courts were completely satisfied with the punishment of the offender, not caring for the victims. Now, 357A, providing mandatory compensation to the victims of crime, asking all the states to for the victim compensation, is a leaping step. Now, Nirbhaya movement. The victimological movement in India was promoted by many events at different points of time. One of the shocking events which stirred the conscience of the people of India was the horrible victimization of brutal rape of young medical student Nirbhaya in Delhi in December 2012. The Nirbhaya victimization was unique as it gained national and international attention through social media, compelling the government machinery and civil society to deliberate on the issue and demanding that sexual violence be perceived as an affront to a woman's autonomy, in opposition to the commonly held patriarchal perception of rape as a dishonor to the victim's family. On December 23, 2012, a three-member committee headed by Justice J.S. Verma, former Chief Justice of Supreme Court, was constituted to recommend amendments 2013 made recommendations on laws relating to rape, sexual harassment, trafficking, child sexual abuse, medical examination of victims, police, besides certain other items. The sad story is that most of the survivors of sexual assault or acid attacks were not aware they were entitled to compensation by the state. According to the NGO working in this field, the law enforcement agencies of none of the states in India have taken any efforts to spread awareness about Central Victim Compensation Fund. Still, even today, the awareness about the availability of compensation under the scheme has not reached all the victims. Now, I am going to conclude with the following few words. Victim justice has been a struggle throughout the world. You must have heard for about an hour, I was talking about the developments of both criminology and victimology. And victimological developments were hardly about 75 years old. in the whole world. But some of the developed countries have made far higher progress to provide to victims. But developing countries, the progress is very slow. But in India, I am happy to say that with our continuous efforts and the progressive higher judiciary, we are able to achieve at least this much. Justice has been a struggle throughout the world. The victimological movement, spearheaded by the World Society of Victim Magna Carta for victims. It has its impact on several countries through though victimology started emerging as an academic discipline in university departments, particularly from 1980s. Victimology was also taught as a module in police academies, National Police Academy, State Police Academies, and Judicial Academy. Even in the National Police Academy, I had the occasion to talk to the judges at National Judicial Academy, Bhopal, about the importance of giving victim compensation and the role of judicial resulted in some amendments in criminal law and procedure for the protection of victims. These incidents have also perhaps given more courage and confidence for the women to come out more openly about their victimization, and reporting of incidents of crime against women has increased. Including victim compensation, and to continue this trend in smaller cities, towns, and villages. Thus, in India, though there are some the victims with compassion and dignity at every stage of his meeting with the criminal justice professionals, which is yet to happen in many cities, towns, and villages of India. This needs the intensive training of criminal justice professionals all over India. Hello? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Are you hearing me?
Yes, sir. You're audible, sir.
Yeah. I'm extremely happy to mention that I am with this talk I am able to sensitize hundreds of law students and law teachers about the need for recognition of the problems of victims, and also to provide much more legal reforms, to create much more legal reforms, to raise the level of victims in the criminal law and procedure to the level of the developed countries, and also to fully realize the provisions of the United Nations Declaration of Basic Principles of Justice for victims of Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I have. Hello? Hello?
Sir, am I audible, sir?
Yes, you are audible. Am I audible? I have concluded.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your time
Yeah.
and effort. in sharing your expertise for the benefits of the students and the professionals. We have come to the end of the session. I now invite Dr. Kumuda ma'am to propose the word of thanks. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, please unmute, ma'am.
So good noon to one and all present in the webinar. It is my great privilege to thank our Director of Legal Studies to give us encouragement and support and guidance for organizing this program. Thank you, sir. It is my gratitude to our beloved principal, Dr. K.S. Gopalakrishnan, sir. So whenever I approached sir, so we are going to organize some program, sir will never say no. So he always said yes. Thank you, sir. I'm very much indebted to you, sir. So he is always giving us encouragement and free hand to deal with this program. So wholeheartedly support this program. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And I express my sincere gratitude and honor to our guest of honor, Professor Dr. K.CHOCKALINGAM, sir. So I'm very much indebted to you, sir. We are blessed to have your session, sir. So it is a thought-provoking session, sir. So we are getting so much of knowledge, sir. Our students are getting enlightened with this knowledge, sir. So because basically the criminology and law, it is an amalgamation of both the criminology and law. So it is a very, very interesting session, sir. So including the victimology, because victims are having a meager provisions in our criminal procedure code. So that was greatly emphasized by us, sir. Thank you so much, sir. So we are very much enlightened by your speech, sir. And I would like to say and honor and my sincere thanks to all the principals of Government Law College. Thank you so much, ma'am, and all the dignitaries for all participating in this webinar. Thank you so much, ma'am. So I express my sincere thanks to my beloved student, Sanofa and Subaida and Suraj and Ramasubramaniam, sir, who is doing all the organizing work. Thank you so much to one and all. Once again, I express my sincere thanks to all the participants and my beloved students. Thank you so much, and thank you so much. And I would express my sincere thanks to all my organizing committee members, executive committee members, one and all, helping me to organizing this wonderful event. Thank you so much, and thanks a lot once again. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All the participants are requested to stand in attention for the national anthem.
Participate. For example, in the making approval of the UN Declaration in 1980.
take a walk and get it. So that sharing, I think, is interesting and important to share. No. Actually, what happened is, normally, you would be surprised that for the last 10 years, I have not given a lecture like this. I have taken part mostly for about 15 minutes inaugurating something, because I have a the known circles, they don't trouble me. They say, sir, we want to take part. That I agree. But she said, I want you to, she asked me, I want you to give a lecture, sir, inaugural lecture for the lecture series. So then I could not say anything. I said, okay. But I'm